So today I'm going to be talking to Miles Grindey. Miles.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Well, yes, I'm good. Thank you very much. Welcome to the show. And thanks for being on. So, traditional first question. What do you do?
I've been known to play guitar. Yeah, I sort of do some like recordings from home and get like bands together and that sort of thing. I tried to do some session stuff last year, but then ended up being kind of funny. So I've sort of like retreated into office working, which is how I think we got introduced, because one of my colleagues is Charlie Robinson. So, and he was like, oh, this guy does this podcast. And so, yeah, so that's where I'm at the moment. I'm about to shoot off and do an adventure in Canada for 2 years. So I've got my Steinberger all ready for the flight.
Oh, wow.
And, but I was tempted to do some slide guitar because I was out in Atlanta just before the pandemic, and I did slide guitar out there. And as you know, Atlanta's like the home of the blues. And I'm just some guy from South Hampton, and I go out there and I play the blues, and they're like, oh my God, the slide is amazing. I'm like, you guys pretty much invented it. Why has no one else played? So I was tempted to do that and be like the one guy in Canada playing slide, but then I just figured, nah, I'd rather have a versatile thing. But yeah, so I'm just a traveling musician, I think is the summary.
Right, cool stuff. Now, let's go back to the, normally people's roots of playing are quite early on. I mean, what's your first sort of involvement with music then? Is it just,
Well, I was going to say my first one, I think I was thinking about this before I joined the call. I was thinking about it. What was my first memory? I've got two that I can't work out which one came first. The first one is being in the parents' car, and there's a burned CD playing mixes between Aerosmith and Guns N' Roses. But then my earliest memory, I think, the alternative one is seeing, I think, like MTV or something. It was either MTV or another VH1 or something. And it was Joe Perry stepping out of the way of a moving train, playing the epic solo from Living on the Edge. And that, I was like, that is what I want to do. And like, my family's entirely musical. I mean, my parents were out in Hollywood in the late 80s when Guns N' Roses kicked off. And I think my mum and my aunt were meant to be extras in the November Rain video, but then they missed the bus going in. So when they finally found the turning, this obviously before Google Maps and everything, so they got lost in Hollywood, not the Rainbow Song, and missed out narrowly being in the November Rain video in the background.
All right, there's a whole bunch of things here. Can I just
go for
chase this little rabbit? So your parents, were they involved in acting, or what was?
Well, my dad was out in the Guitar Institute, MIT, GIT. He was a Git in the late 80s. So he was out there, I think, for just a year, but he was out there sort of when Paul Gilbert was teaching at GIT kind of thing. And Mum just sort of went along with him for a couple of months here and there. And also we've got like family out in California.
Okay, so your dad's a serious guitar player then?
Well, he's been known to play guitar. The capacity to which is sort of subjective, but that was sort of like an in at first, I think, for me as a musician. But then it wasn't until I think I must have been about 14, because there's always like the age where you sort of started and you don't know if you're going to continue doing it. And then there's like the time that like the light hits your face. You're like, Jake Elwood and the Blues Brothers. You walk in the church and the light hits, and that happened to me. I remember exactly when that happened to me. I was 14, off school ill. And I thought, what is the deal with Eddie Van Halen? One Google on YouTube. That was it. I was sold. And then I was like, right, we're going to, really give a good crack at this. That's what I thought.
So you were obviously playing earlier then?
Yeah, I was doing it was just like, you know, the guitar was, in fact, I've still got the guitar with me, but it's changed a bit since then. But you know, one of the guitars behind me was always like in the corner of my room gathering dust. I think it had like Xbox stickers on at one point. Like it wasn't really a thing. And then eventually seeing Eddie, and I was like, Jesus, like, oh my God. You know, I think it was like when Spotify was just kicking off properly about 2009. So then I was just on that listening to everything by Van Halen. And then I think, yeah, that was really the big kicker. Like, this is what I want to do.
Right. Okay. So I'm still pursuing this thing about the Hollywood extras.
Yeah.
So, because I mean, I don't think I've ever heard anybody go, well, you know, somebody was an extra in the film. So how did that come around then? I mean, because this is obviously fundamental to what sort of life you've got, I think.
Yeah, I think part of it was the fact of just place and time, really, because this was just sort of like around about the time that my parents were out there. I think like 87, 88, and then I think like dad came back for a bit and mum came back, and then they started making life, and then they made friends out there. So when they went back to visit in like early 90s, it went from, I think I was told by my mum a story about how like on the lamppost where they had like the adverts like musicians wanted, no shredders, no GIT, you know, they were going for that sort of alternative kind of sound that was emerging out of Washington. So there's all those kind of stories, but like, yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long that the folks were out there kind of thing. It was like, I think my dad only got like a year's scholarship or something for GIT, and then mum sort of tagged along and like knew people and new friends anyway, just because they were out there. So they knew the Guns N' Roses roadie, Carlos Boy. I haven't seen him for years. My last memory of him was about 2004. He was chilling on the sofa in our family friend's house, and that was about it. But I had no idea then. That was like at the time I just started learning guitar and didn't really pay attention to too much going on. And then and so then we lost touch with him for years now. But yeah, that's like the only famous person that I've really like growing up. That's the famous muso that I had. Well, Brody, I guess. But he played. I was told he played on the Manson track. He played in a Spaghetti Incident, the hidden one. I was told he played on that. So I don't know whether that's true or not. I haven't verified that. So
quite likely.
Yeah.
Quite likely.
There you go.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm still not quite sure how, because they seemed quite interesting people, your parents, just because, yeah, because where they've ended up.
Well, I think particularly, see, after all that, I think in the 90s they had me and they were best. But then it was sort of like they sort of like retreated more. So dad was teaching guitar, and then that was about it really. He hasn't really done anything else since. And mum sort of like, you know, is working for UCL at the moment. You know, she never really, she wasn't really a rock. She just listened to the music. She didn't do anything. Amount of times I've sort of tempted her saying, "You want to have a guitar lesson?" She's like, no. So she's more of a, but I've got to say she's an excellent set of ears. Whenever I've come, you know, down the stairs, like produce a demo or something, I'm like, right, listen to this, and she's like trying to cook dinner or something, and she's like, could you hurry this along, please? That's it. But she always cut, you know, shoot straight with me, if ever needed it. But yeah, no. But my stepfather's a bit more interesting because he's allegedly going deaf. But then if I play a guitar through like out of speakers instead of like, you know, with headphones on, so my usual setup is just a DV mark into Focusrite, then, you know, max, and no one gets disturbed. But if I ever think, is anyone actually in the house? Well, I can find out because I can take out the headphones, and despite him saying he's going deaf, he will certainly hear the frequency of the guitar.
Interesting stuff. I'm sort of, because obviously, you know, one of the reasons to do this podcast is just, apart from the fact I like chatting to people, the sort of creative things, you know, a lot of it is environment. And I don't mean that from the point of view of, where you live type of thing, but, your family, early influences, like you're talking about, Eddie Van Halen, spotting that and listening to music. And that has an extraordinary effect that's much longer lasting than I think we realise.
Yeah.
The sort of music that sort of influences you early on, it sort of comes back in some shape or form. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be just listening to that band, but there's a lot of elements of that come back in what you do. I mean, often people that are sort of more of my age, their early influences are the Beatles.
Yeah.
And of course, my sister, who was older than me, had Beatles records when they first came out.
Oh, really?
And of course, what happens is, although I wasn't, because I was sort of interested in playing, I was more interested in sort of Hendrix and Zappa and bands like people like that, and Clapton and Beck and all that. But of course, as soon as you get involved in songwriting, the Beatles come back, and I sort of rediscovered that for myself, and then all the things that you sort of missed initially. So it has this sort of thing of coming back again, the things that influenced you very early on, they seem to come back. And I hear that a lot from people, things that, yeah, that's really cool. So you get involved in the playing. I'm assuming you're sort of encouraged because your dad's playing guitar and teaching guitar.
It was sort of like, well, interesting enough, I remember exactly where it was. I must have been about 11, 12, and I was starting to, really get musical roots and everything. Really wanted to, so I was sort of playing games probably before I should have done, and hearing it in in-game radio, and then being like, oh, I really like this sound. I really like this sound. Oh, I know this year is like 1985. How did you know? Because I heard the drums and it's got the gated reverb, the big set, and I was getting really interested. I really love that drum sound. So I was starting to say to the parents, like, oh, can I do drums instead? And they were like, no, your dad's a guitar teacher. So why don't you just do that instead? And also, I think they were just trying to think, young guy hitting things. Yeah. Are we ready for that? No. So go and play your guitar. You can be quiet. So that was fine. I think I would probably go into it. I was watching a video the other day of Jeff Porcaro from Toto, who was doing the shuffle from Rosanna, and I was like, that's so good. I wish I could do that. I'd just be doing that 24/7.
It's funny, actually. That is, when you're working with drummers, that is often the thing that they sort of throw in as a warm-up.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so lovely.
Because it's such a fantastic drum pattern, isn't it? It's incredible. And as soon as you hear it, you know what it is.
Oh, it's immediately. There's no ifs or buts. I remember actually, I was screwed by there's like a radio edit version that missed out that entire shuffle bit at the beginning. So when I actually heard it years later, like the actual, I was like, what is this drum bit? Why didn't I have this? But this like single edit from like this compilation album.
That's an outrage.
That is an injustice. You're absolutely right, Vic. That is it. That's exactly. We should start a petition immediately. Ban that version.
Yeah. Because that's an interesting thing, because that song is really top and tailed by two extraordinary things that incidentally often get missed off the edit.
Yeah,
a single edit, because obviously the last bit is that jam session.
It's so good happens. In G. It's so
and
good.
It's just devastating.
It is good. I mean, this thing I remember once. I actually because Steve.
We better just say what that was, just in case people missed the fact that it's Toto's Rosanna, right?
Yeah, that's it. Toto, from Toto 4 and
Toto 4, yeah. So
but no, I was just going to say, there's a big kick up the arse I had from my guitar teacher and one of my closest friends, Mark Poulter. He was explaining to me because I got my arse firmly kicked in Atlanta, going over there, like going, I want to be like, this sort of like hair metal thing, and then meeting all these jazz guys who then explained to me things like, well, if you listen to like the Rover on the Led Zepp by Zepp, then you're going to hear like Bonham and Page playing together in, you know, a sort of a waltz kind of thing, and you got to listen to how they're doing this, and then like, oh, why is that a bit in I remember this bit. It was like the bit from Rosanna, no, not Rosanna, we just talked about that one. Amanda by Boston, that bridge bit, that 2/5 progression at the end. Why does that sound so amazing? Why are they doing it? You know, and all these little questions I had. Eventually, I realised I hadn't really bothered with like the pentatonics at all up until that point, and so I was thinking, why am I getting my ass kicked by everyone, including the harmonica player? Like, why is even the triangle players throwing shapes that I don't understand? You know, it's that kind of thing. I'm thinking, why is this? And eventually, it's like all down to like these really basic things that I missed out when I started.
Okay, let's go back to this, because this is really, I think you've hit on something really interesting from the point of view of guitar playing of maybe you're early on from your dad's generation and before, and what we've ended up with now. Now, who was it? Oh God, I've forgotten his name. Okay, but there was a guy who came and did a talk at I can't think of the guy's name. It's going to bug me. But anyway, this guy came and gave a talk at the RGT, the guitar, guitar registry.
Yeah.
1 year, because they used to have a conference, which I used to do, and he was talking about guitar styles, and he was saying, if you go back, not that far, he said, but if you go back, the roots of rock music, you could look at it and think, oh, there's, you got the rock and roll thing and the country music thing, and of course the blues, and then within that, of course, with the rock and roll strain, you got the jazz thing going on, because a lot of those rock and roll guitarists and also a lot of the country guitarists were originally jazzers.
Yeah.
And well, I was thinking more about people like Hank Garland and a lot of the sort of session players. They had originally been session players as jazzers, but of course, as rock and roll kicked in, it meant that they didn't have any work.
No.
So they sort of moved across, to where the work was. Right? So so the point that he was making was that if you go into a college, if I go into a college and there's a load of people sort of hanging around playing amazing sort of shreddy guitar, right?
Yeah.
But what he discovered was that when he started talking to these people, these kids about his book and all the rest of it, he said to one of them, "Oh, just play a 12-bar blues for me, and I'll demonstrate something." And this kid went, "I can't do that."
Yeah, what is that like?
And he said, and for a moment, he was like, "What do you mean you don't know? You don't know that?" Because it, So basically, what he was saying is, it's the sort of lingua franca of music. Now, this is the problem I see, is that when you got a group of people together, that was the thing, wasn't it? You do a jam. This is 12-bar blues. That's it.
Yeah, it's the easiest thing you can do.
Yeah, as long as you understand it.
Yeah.
Right. But if it's not the way, because it's fundamental to the language of the music.
Yeah.
But we've ended up now where people are learning stuff that doesn't include that at all.
No, they jump straight into modes, but then they don't realise that actually, if you take away the sort of chords and play the modes over them, they all sound the same because it's the chords that make the
that's
note.
exactly that's what I was coming around to when you were saying about the fact that you hadn't done the pentatonics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've got a bunch of books propping up I've got two. I've got my Mac here, and then I've got a monitor here. And propping up my monitor is like I've got a couple of Steve Kahn books, and there's one by a guy, the big blue one. I can't see it from here. That's it. It's by Lorenzo Price. It's a fantastic thing. I go back to it occasionally, every now and again, if I really want to try something a little bit spicy. But it's got all the modes, all the things, but it explains, well, it shows the scales. It goes, you need to have these chords in it and play these, sort of like explains what you're doing and why you're doing it in a very easy way. And I didn't really have that before Atlanta. Then during and after Atlanta, I was like, oh, that's why when I try and do like the Steve Vai bit here, it doesn't work over this because it's missing this chord and this note and this thing. But the most interest and the thing that really cemented it was my friend Mark. He told me, over the Thriller's Gone by B.B. King, play For the Love of God by Steve Vai. And I go, what? Exactly the same? No, he said, move it up to the sort of B and play that over it and you'll find. And I was like, oh my God. And then that just like, I don't know, for some people it makes sense, but for me it rued a lot of anxiety for my playing because I'm constantly thinking, and I'm realizing actually it's all intertwined, and it just made it so much easier, and my playing became more confident just overnight, and I just it's such a relief.
Right, yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? So let's talk about this, because this is, sorry, but I've got a singer in the background here. I don't know if you can hear it. But anyway, we'll just see if she decides to go back downstairs. Yeah, because I think there is those moments where you things sort of click in your understanding and your playing about things. I mean, because obviously, I often mention this on the podcast about how if you work things out from the recordings, which is obviously what we had to do, because there were no decent books, they weren't accurate in any shape or form, and that was just the chords. It wasn't even it wasn't showing you how people played anything like soloing. You had to work that out from a recording, and so subsequently you had to use your ear in a way that and you probably didn't know the theory, because why would you? You wouldn't. No, yeah. You'd be what you worked out. And then gradually, by piecemeal, you would put together how you understood how the music worked. But of course, your first port call was your ear.
Yeah.
Always. And then of course you learnt it like you would learn any language, where you picked up phrases by people.
Yes.
And then obviously early on, I was, my personal experience of this was that I realised that a lot of these early British guitar players had been listening to people like B.B. King, Freddie King, Buddy Guy, Albert King, Muddy Waters and whatever. So I went back and looked at that, and then of course you recognise the phrasing, and then so it was all literally from that perspective. Now, so that that was one of my sort of eureka moments, when I suddenly went, okay, I got this now. I could see the link. Now, so going back to the thing with Atlanta, tell me about this, because you were saying you went out there. So when was this thing?
So this was a split between two trips. In fact, one of it was to spend. So I was sort of hanging about with one of the people that one of my parents knew me actually from the GIT days. So it all comes back round. And
yes, amazing.
And he was, and so he was guitar sort of lecturer at Atlanta Institute. I thought it was like BIM. I thought it was like Atlanta Institute of Modern Music, but no, it's Media and Music or something like that. And he was head of the guitar department since its start, and then he sort of just left for some reason. I don't know why. Anyway, and so he was doing the jam scenes. That's my exposure to jazz jams. And when I first went out there, I was like, God, this is boring. This doesn't make any sense to me. But then eventually, being around it long enough, you start to pick up little phrases, like you say, phrases and work, because it's a language, isn't it? Music's a language. So
it is. Yeah, I think that's the thing that seems to get missed.
Yeah,
that's the problem, because again, you see, sorry, I'm sort of interrupting you.
Go for it. Yeah.
But the thing about this is that it's really difficult to write something down on a like a lesson plan.
Yeah.
Which is basically, well, it's a language, so we're going to listen, right? Because you can write chapter and verse about modes and harmony and all the rest of it, And unfortunately, what that does is it skews things in a particular way.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah, definitely.
going back to what you're saying now. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, but this is it. Seeing like being like the live fire exercises, being in the deep end. So I came in and I did the blues progression. I never really, and I knew it from jamming it like in my university, bedroom or something like that on my slide guitar. But like really, it was just so I took it out there. So first thing I went to was at the Velvet Note, played at a jam session, played slide blues. People were like, "Oh my god!" And I was like, because even though all I had done was I was doing the Raikuda school, so that was my exposure to slide. It was two people, well, three people actually. First one was seeing the Jewel from Crossroads and hearing that absolute killer tone and that incredible performance. Not Ralph Macchio, it was Raikuda.
Yeah, of course, yeah, absolutely.
And then it was Joe Perry doing Let the Music Do the Talking, both versions. And then, but the last one was actually a local guy doing really old school blues, Pete Harris. He does this really old school acoustic set occasionally, and hearing that kind of like Delta, incredible, that made me want to do slide. So when I eventually took it to Atlanta, so I went, here it is actually. So it's a Joe Perry slide, and I liked it because it's ceramic, but it's got that little grip. So when I'm on stage, I'm sweating one out. At least I would hit someone in the face. But yeah, so I went out and did that, and I tuned the guitar up. I think I did open E, and then did the Raikuda method of getting capo and barring it up the neck kind of thing. Because then some people say to me, play it in standard, but every time I try, I just don't. Part of me is the feeling.
No.
And I tried to explain this actually to the guy I stayed with in Atlanta. I tried to explain to him, and bear in mind, this was the guy who was teaching guitar in Atlanta, one of a major area of music currently. I think one of his, he told me, I haven't verified this, but he told me one of his students was Tosin Abasi. Anyway, he says this to me, and I whack outside. We're both sat in his studio in his house. He's got his guitar tuned to open E, I got my tune, and I'm trying to explain to him, and I'm sliding in, I'm going for the feeling. For him, it was like he was having a panic attack trying to hit those, and part of the accessibility of slide I found, especially in being in Atlanta, was people who are used to like system, just like attack and like trying to like approach like runs or sort of like complicated almost shreddy-esque kind of phrases. When they try and play slide, they realize actually you have to kind of feel it. You have to like kind of that, otherwise it's going to sound stiff as a board. You'll be,
Yeah, it sounds rubbish. Yeah, it's a completely different thing. I don't do an awful lot of slide, and it's one of these things that I only do occasionally, but I really enjoy playing it because it sort of rewires your head somehow.
Oh yeah.
But I've always, and there's a couple of people that I've taught slide to who've become quite good slide players, and I think the first thing is that when you start off from the perspective, well, why were people playing slide guitar for the blues? Well, often those people were beggars.
Bottleneck.
So the point about that was that, if you could tune your guitar to a chord, you could sit on a street corner and play something as a 12 bar that would work. So immediately you're coming from a completely different place.
Yeah.
From somebody else who's writing a song in order to, to do a recording or whatever it is. You're ending up with a bunch of people who are playing it through necessity. And that really fascinated me. So a lot of those early players are blind. If you go, you get a lot of the early recordings, so they are blind. Yeah. So immediately that's coming from another place. So it's got to be about feel, because if the guys are blind, you're not going to be seeing anything.
No.
You're not going to be reading anything.
No.
So immediately that's imbued with a different sort of element. And of course, when you start talking about people who are knowledgeable players, Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And they're trying to think their way through slide guitar.
It doesn't match up.
It doesn't match. It doesn't match up. Now, okay, there's always an exception to the rule, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think, and that's why I try to explain to, I think, just over the years, I mean, even non-slide, it's like some people play stiff as a board, like it's like they're panicking. And it's like, just relax, just literally, just as you hear it. Don't do as you're told. Do as you hear. Do as you feel. Don't, because if someone tells you must play these notes, don't play. If you start playing with the thought that someone's gonna, throw a pencil at you, which has happened. There was a jam session that ran in the before times. They used to travel about doing this thing, and one of the routes in the circuit, kind of thing, one of the destinations was a pub in South Hampshire. And I remember one time I dared try and do like a Van Halen style quick tap on the 12th fret of the G string, and immediately I just heard this whoosh pass my ear, and it was a pencil. And then I was told by the person who ran this, we don't do that here. And I was a bit surprised about being told. And then someone that came in singing like Howlin' Wolf got told off because he grabbed the microphone with another hand. And it's just kind of that thing where it's like, okay, talk about accessibility and everything. But as an example, it's very rare that any player is actually going to come across something like that. It does exist, but like what I would say to players is just relax. That's not going to happen. The chance of that happening, you have to look for that.
That's interesting, because I think something very odd about that.
Well, tell me
attitude, because again, there's a lot of cases of people. Fingerboard tapping has been around since the 1930s. I think there was a guy.
Yeah. It's way just one note. And I got an IKEA pencil thrown past my ear.
Yeah. But so it's not like something that's that recent. And there are clips of people doing stuff. I've got a feeling. I mean, somebody said there was a recording of Hendrix doing something that sounded like fingerboard tapping in some sort of bootleg. Whether he did or he didn't, I don't know.
No, we don't.
But there was a track by Rory Gallagher, I think, that had something that sounded. Again, it was just a recording, so it was difficult to tell, but it sounded like fingerboard tapping, just on one little section of something. And again, Gallagher could have done that. I mean, it's quite possible that these people were doing things. So immediately you're talking about somebody who's, a blues player doing it, and then somebody else who's a sort of, futuristic whatever. But who's
exactly.
So it's sort of nonsense. I even saw a film of John McLaughlin recently.
Yeah.
And he does some fingerboard tapping on one particular thing, and you go like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
That's an outrage.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Yeah,
I mean, it was only like on one thing, but the point is, it's like, well,
it's just expression.
Who sets this idea that you can't do something?
I think
it's sort of nonsense.
I mean, bluntly, it's just some miserable people. But then this is the reason, I'm thrilled that like Southampton has like quite a vibrant, jam.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah. Fortunately, that kind of vibe died when COVID sort of hit.
Oh, that's good. Then.
So it's like
that's something good that's come out of COVID.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the guys who runs it, Ludo, lovely guy. So I remember one time, I think this was still in the before times. Some of his friends brought in like a tube screamer and plugged it in, and I had this like white Strat I used, and I sort of wound down the treble a little bit on it, so I had a bit more humbuckery, and then just like had a great time. I think we did Crossroads, and I just tried to do the Van Halen thing on a Fender Strat, which actually worked out quite well. But again, it's like there were no pencils thrown at me that time, and I got a free drink. So
that's good. So what are you doing with it? Because you do a lot of sort of recording and working on things, don't you, yourself? Yeah. So is that your
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm at the moment. I think I started off doing this like sort of recording tunes by myself and getting like bands together, or like if I had to do everything together, I'd just do it like, virtually or something, But I did that. I think I was in a band at university, and then I left the band, realized I liked doing the recordings, so I kept going. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to do it in a way that sort of like told other bands that, look, this is what I can do, like, and sort of like as a calling card, and it still is in my mind. But the problem is that now it's sort of like, I feel like it might just be in my head, but it feels like it's a double-edged sword, because it's people who think that I do one thing and then I do another thing, but then they may think it's different. So unless I actually approach band and say, hey, do you need another guitarist? Like, they don't have enough to choose from at the moment.
Yeah. Well, that's always the problem for guitar players, because there are a lot of them out there.
So I try and say, well, look, I can play a bit of bass. There's a mandolin down there somewhere. If you want to do the Battle of Evermore cover, it's all yours.
Yeah, right. So tell me, what have you got there? Because you've already shown me a Steinberger.
Yeah, so I've got in the here's a really cheap but terrible 12-string Kimbara from 1975. Here we got a 1981 Ibanez Musician. The reason why I got this one was because I liked the Roland that Pat Metheny was using. I thought I liked the look of it, but I'm not entirely keen on what Pat Metheny was doing, but like I like the look of it. Anyway, then we got here. This is actually the workhorse, really. This is a Tokai.
Tokai.
From
awesome.
Japan. This one, and my friend keeps threatening to hide in my bins to get this, even though he's already got one, and I'm sure his wife would be furious if he came home with this. But anyway, then behind
they're great guitars, Tokai, aren't they?
They're so good. Like I used to have an Explorer that I modified because I had a Def Leppard phase. And I tried to make it a bit like Phil Collins' Explorer, the black one. Yeah. And so I had a Kahler mounted on it and a Floyd Rose nut. Never stayed in tune. I never got on with the body shape.
Oh, no.
Nice to look at.
Yeah.
This one is what a friend calls the broom. So this was the original first guitar. So this is the original body of it. The neck's new, but it used to be a rosewood squire neck, and then we got a little Goto system here. So I got it set up floating, and so it was a lovely guy, Adam, from Southampton Guitar Repairs. He helped me put this all together, and he asked how I want to set it up, and I said I wanted a bit more Alan Holdsworthy rather than Van Halen. So it looks more Van Halen, but actually the tones I'm getting out of this, because this is this pickup was given to me, and it's a performance from Performance Guitars from Hollywood, and. Wow. And this one's got some of the nicest clean tones I've ever heard from a humbucker. So this is, I'm trying to find.
That looks really, I really like that guitar, because, for people who aren't watching the video, because it looks nicely battered around, and well, I think it just seems to have a character to it.
Well, it plays fantastic. I mean, my only problem is that the trem block is a little bit too big for the body. But other than that, really, as long as I don't have it on my hip and I'm just getting some sharps and some flats out of it. But so this one, I loved it. And but it's surprised me an all-rounder. Not many people think that when they think single humbucker guitars. I think it's quite one thing, but this is actually very versatile. I've got another Tokai here. And this
I've never seen people with two Tokais. That's amazing.
But this one's a Chinese. But I was thinking about the story to tell you about this one. This one I bought on my 21st birthday. I didn't have much money, but I was given some money by my folks, and I think it was meant for my first year. I was at my first year at uni, and I was thinking I should probably left that to cost of living even at that time. I was in Brighton, but then I saw this guitar and I was like, I'll make do it. I had no idea what to use it for, so I got really bummed out for a couple of months, thinking, oh God, I've just spent 300 quid on this guitar I could have used. Blah, blah. And eventually I was like, actually, slide. Because you got the P90, you got all you need is here. And I've used this on a couple of recordings. I used this on Nasal Coffee when we did the recording session in Southampton. And then there's a Yamaha acoustic behind it, that's also slide. I've got something here that I'll show you that I really am dying to get rid of, but no one wants it, and you'll see why, and I'll explain it to the viewers. So this was an acoustic I picked up in a charity shop. It was in the window and it was in relatively good condition, but it wasn't electroacoustic. So a friend of mine came back from Atlanta and he put in this pick guard to hold up this pickup to then have it wired. I think, yeah, here.
Oh, wow.
Wired it. It sounds like crap. And I call it the Fender Cracker Caster because he's even painted on here with a felt tip. And I keep offering to people saying, hey, you want to learn guitar? Do you want a guitar? And they're like, oh, what guitar is it? They see this and they go, no, thanks. For the people that don't play, no. And so it's just...
Yeah, but you could always, if you're teaching somebody, you can always just lend it to them, couldn't you? I mean, actually, I quite like that because it's the sort of... it's the sort of thing I could imagine somebody like... oh, yeah, hang on. Oh, yeah, right. So we got the bass. Yeah.
And it's a Tokai bass. It's a hard puncher. Flats on a P. I figured it's absolutely lovely. And then I think the final, I've got another one in a case that I'm dying to get done. It's a Telecaster, but I'm trying to get it done like it's a stacked humbucker in the bridge. Yeah. And I'm trying to get it done like an Esquire, so it does the 3 different voices. Yeah. But then I haven't had time to get that organised. But the last one I got hung up is one that I was dreaming about when I was 15, and I got it. It's a Kramer 1984.
Oh wow! Oh wow!
And I used to have a couple of Kramers. I used to have one of the 100 series from the 80s, but it had what I call the cocaine neck because for some reason the high E by factory default was too high. So I was just like, it was constant, but it was lovely. It sounded great, but it's just that always choked out bends and things like that. And then I had a Stage Master, that was nice. But again, I changed what I was doing, and I wasn't really using them, so I sold them off. But this one, I was like, I'm never getting rid of this one because this is like the dream. This for me when I was 15, I was like, I'm not going to get rid of it. There you go. It's lovely.
You don't see them very often anymore, do you?
No, but the interesting thing is, though, is that, I think it's nice that Epiphone and Gibson are still trying to make stuff happen with Kramer, but I think, I don't know, there's quality control issues. Like with this one, I think one of the tuning pegs is sort of off, and I've had to have the input jack sorted out more times than I care to mention, more times than any of the other ones I've ever had. And there's something wrong with it. I think even with the Stage Master, because where you have to access the Floyd Rose from the back of the guitar to adjust the little Allen key, there was wood covering that, so I couldn't access that key bit to lock in the stepping up the arm, and I had to cut out the wood myself. It's
interesting, isn't it, that you can get an inch. Well, I mean, okay. I was going to say, you got instruments like classic guitar shapes like Gibson Les Paul, but obviously the Fenders, there's a Strat and a Telecaster, and really they're so accurate. The design is so good. They're still basically the same guitar, and yet you can have instruments where they try to change things, and it just doesn't really work.
No,
it's amazing that they got it, especially Leo Fender's stuff.
Yeah,
so right straight off the bat. I mean, it's amazing, really.
It's amazing. I mean, the only difference I would say is I would argue to my dying breath that the sort of this one here, the Ibanez Musician, I call it the Super Les Paul because you hear about Super Strats. But
it is like a you're right.
This is the most comfortable hardtail I've ever used. You've got the 3 voicings on the neck position. I was going to go for one with the 3 voicings on the bridge position, but then that one fell through, so I figured, well, I'll just stick the red here. But it's literally, and the only difference is that it's slightly more stratty in terms of the double cutaway, but it's almost early PR. I mean, you can see it, can't you? It's a bit more PRS-y actually.
Yeah.
Before PRS, but then and again, that's I would say, I mean, I see what you think. I mean, the PRS, sort of the SE and the S, the sort of the models you see, they're a bit of a blend, aren't they? Between a bit like this, almost a blend between the Les Paul and the
also they're a bit like the SG, the Yamaha.
Oh
SG
God,
series.
I've heard nothing but good things about the Yamaha. I've never played one, but I've heard nothing but good things about.
The only thing, they were rather heavy. That was the only thing.
Right, I see, because that's pretty heavy. The musician is very heavy. Like I think I had to get the strap right because my neck was, or my shoulder was really getting it. Because I like to play relatively high, not too high, not like Tom Morello high, but high enough that I can attack with accuracy. And
so what are you doing playing wise then? What's the tell me a little bit about what you've done. And
well, at the moment, I mean, at the moment I'm just practicing these days. All I'm doing at the moment, I change between like a blues one just to like keep the chops ready for like blues jam sessions if I get bored. But most of the time, the thing I'm loving at the moment is just these simple, but they change in terms of the intensity, the vamp stuff. So you take a B7 chord, because then you can play major minor. You can like throw in little bits here, maybe mixolydian, maybe you could do something, anything you like. And that I like that, because for years, every time I went to like Logic or something to write a bit of music or something, I would think, oh God, I don't want people to get bored. So I'd have like, I do, kind of going back to what you said earlier about the Beatles and coming a bit more full circle when you listen eventually as you develop and you find out some of the stuff you're listening to, why do you like it? Well, the Beatles, they had, instead of 2 sections of 4 bars, they had a section of 8. So it would be, it wouldn't be like copy and paste. It would be that one section is 8 bars. And so I would write music like with like 6 or 7 chords. And I think it sounds good, but then I think, how does it link up? But then going back to the vamp stuff actually made me realize actually some of the best stuff is actually incredibly simple. So like, I think, was it Average White Band Pick Up the Pieces? That's a favorite of mine to play. And that is really about maybe 3 or 4 chords across the whole thing. One section being literally a minor chord the whole way through, and then until you get to change the 4. I think actually, and on that, I know that Herbie Hancock's Chameleon, right? There is a B section in there, but you have to go about, I think, was it like 13 minutes in, and it changes, and it's like 1 chord, and it's back to the form. That at the moment, so mainly it's sort of like jazz funk I'm sort of using to really get the chops in, but I find it translates over so well with other things. So if I can just get the chops down, and that way I know when to like attack and change. So say for instance there's like a 1-7-4 or something, I know when to add in that mixolydian for the 7th and then go back into the and it's just so much fun. But once you learn how to do it, all the sort of, I mean, remember when I started playing guitar, that was the thing that used to hold me back in terms of soloing. Instead of I get stuck in a box in like that sort of standard, if I'm playing an E, if I'm playing along the 12th fret, doing the sort of like minor pentatonic, try and like stay in that. I remember doing that when I was younger, getting stuck in there. And now I'm like, oh, I could go, how am I feeling? How does the music sound? What's everyone else playing? And you learn, things like phrasing and things like that. And just through this vamp thing, you learn how to move with the music. And that is what I'm doing at the moment, just to develop a bit more. I haven't had much inspiration to write lately. I think Funk Right Off, Major C, that was like the last thing that I did, and that was a lot of fun. But it's kind of demoralizing at the moment when music is like you put in about $3,000 to make something and then you get like 30 quid out of like 2 years. It's so depressing. And I've not seen a CD baby payment made to me for quite some time. I'm quite like sad about it. But it's what it is.
No. Well, I think that's just another thing, isn't it? It's about what's the future of what we're doing from the point of view of, a lot of the people that I teach, I get them to sort of think about how maybe what we've experienced has been a blip, instead of, because we always think about music as if it's always been like this. Well, it hasn't, of course. In fact, it's never been like this. This is a tiny little blip in time where people that were playing music were doing it in the way that we do it, where you can record and you can play gigs and travel around and all the rest of it. For most of the time, it was never like that. So it's a case of like looking at this and thinking, well, what was it that people who did music, who were they? What did they do? And start looking at that, because we need to rethink. This is my take anyway on this at the moment. We need to rethink what we can do with music, because obviously music is something that's inherent in us as humans, as art is, But it has a significant meaning that I think we might have lost.
Yeah,
we've sort of commercialized it and materialized something which wasn't really like that. So when you're thinking about things like being able to record and sell your recordings, there was a bit of a heyday that you could make money, but now I don't really see that in that way. And I'm not saying that people won't make money, but it's not quite as straightforward. We haven't got that.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like you've got to be more of an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that really, like, I came into it going, okay, I'm going to give it a damn good go, I'm going to fly off to this place and record here and do this. And I was doing that, but it's such a loss. And then each time, and then I try different things. I try and get creative with how I market. But the problem is that what nobody tells you is that really you do, like, if you're going to go and be like, right, you're going to be a solo artist, you're going to do this, you have to have people and money. There's two things you need to have, because you cannot do it all on your own. And I was under the impression that you had to do it all your own. So I was doing it all on my own. I was doing and the thing was, I was burning out so fast.
Yeah,
I was just
that's a very good point.
So fast and getting all the wrong information here and there. I mean, I like the way I like to do it. I do encourage people to do it this way, but obviously everyone has their own way. I encourage people to just look around you. What are people doing? Go with your gut. Is it actually working for them? Did they? Because some people do, like, I think I don't see it as much anymore, but at the start it was like everyone had sort of like this, like, it was almost like this template of how to present themselves as musicians. I never did it because I thought I hated it. It was like cheesy, and it was like no one cared. I'm the kind of person that's like, get to the point. So it's always like, right, hello, I'm this guy, I'm doing this, check it out. That's it. I don't want to give a story. I don't want to waste, because people don't have the time these days. People are too busy working, whatever. They don't, and that's my point of view. I could be horribly wrong, and I accept that. But it's just, I always used to get wound up by seeing like artists put on like Twitter, what's your favorite bread? And I'm like, the one that you bring home from your fantastic music, keep it up. I'm not going to get into a debate over Kingsman Hovis on someone who's trying to release a 3-track EP. I'm not interested in that. I could be horrible. And people, especially as you say about the commercialization, people want it to be like the success story. Some people want to be the character in that story. Some people want to see that character. People like, I don't know, some movie that came out and the protagonist really struggled, but by the end of the film they were world famous, and they want to be.
Yeah. Well, it's all a myth.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what
it's all a myth.
Yeah, exactly. The only accurate thing I've seen from music films, I was rewatching Spinal Tap the other day, and it's like, well, you didn't make it in this market, but you might make it in the other market. But that, they even had a record label then. It's not like they were like in their bedroom recording, a whole album with mates from around the world. It was literally like that in that bit of fiction. They had a record label that still had some kind of support and management and people and roadies, and they still had like a whole team. They weren't one person trying to do it all. And so when I see people like, I always get a little bit sad now whenever I see like a new Instagram account that a friend of mine has started up or something like that, and they say, well, I'm a singer, I'm starting off singing. I'm like, I give you 6 months. That's what I say. I give you 6 months from like trying to get it, sort of realizing you're way over your head. Where's the support? Is there any support? Unless you're in like, I don't know, like Solent University doing music, there's very little support outside of that. You have to, you know, because you have, at least you got like, you know, resources there. When you're starting out with nothing, you have nothing, and so you either have to really stick to it, lose a lot.
I think that's a really good point, actually, Miles. You know, I think what's going on brings me back to this idea of entrepreneurial thinking. If people just realise that you have to think like that, you've got to think about, well, you know, you've got to make some money.
Yeah.
But you've got to really think outside the box, and just, you know, an Instagram account might be great for some people because they may be very sort of, you know, visual and stuff like that. But it's just a case of just getting your message out there in whatever way that is. You know. Cool stuff, mate. Well, we've been chatting for about an hour, so that's good. So give us some links where people can find your stuff. Okay, Absolutely. I'll put that on the show notes.
All right, yeah, no, I've got a lovely little link tree to save you time. So
yeah. That's great. Yeah, so send us that, and I'll pop that on there. And I wish you all the best with what you're doing.
Thank you very much.
And your trip to Canada, because we didn't sort of push that, but
well, it's to be determined. You know, I might start a TikTok thing like you know, Britain, Canada, or something like. Well,
do that. Big place, not many people, so you might be able to.
Who knows?
A lot of traveling. Yeah. So yeah, take your slide guitar.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good stuff. Anyway, lovely chatting to you.
And you too.
I wish you all the best, mate. That's really cool. All right, see you then.
Yeah.